Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining tonight's AeHIN microphones are muted throughout the meeting, and for comments, please box, and for questions, please use the questions box. Tonight's speaker is Dr. Tony Shannon. Dr. Shannon is the director of the Ripple Foundation. He trained in emergency medicine and informatics in Ireland, UK, and the US. He has over 20 years of experience in frontline clinical practice as an emergency physician. He also has over 15 years of experience in leadership in informatics at the local, regional, national, and international levels. His interests include change, leadership, open source in healthcare, and the broader potential of the commons for a better world. May we now call in our speaker, Dr. Tony?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay there? I'm just beginning to do my presentation. Can you hear me okay there, Cha?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. One moment, please, and I'm just going to launch what I'm doing here. Okay, so hopefully you should be able to see my screen.
Yes, I can see your screen. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so thanks very much to everybody who's joined, and I'm just going to begin by introducing myself and the work that I'm doing as part of an introduction to the work of the Ripple Foundation, which I'm now leading and involved in. And really what we're trying to do is get a group of people together to support the adoption of an open health and care platform that we think is needed. In this 21st century, we think that there's a major change needed in the health and care market around a more open platform, and we were slowly but surely drawn into the challenge, and now we find ourselves in the middle of that. So let me just move to my next slide. So yeah, my background has already been introduced, thanks. So my background is an emergency physician, and I'm talking to you from Dublin, where I began my training and worked in largely the NHS in the UK, and also spent some time in the US involved in emergency medicine and informatics. And now I find myself as a clinician trying to agitate for the change that's needed in the market with the work that we're doing in the foundation. Just again to just reinforce my background and some of the drivers then as to why I'm doing what I'm doing. My background in emergency medicine taught me a lot about the need for change. You may, depending on where you work, know your emergency department pretty well or not at all, but most emergency departments in around the world are under pressure in rich as well as poor countries, and that's really because of the demand that's at the front line. And we saw in the NHS in England a huge amount of change in emergency medicine going back 10 or more years, which involved a lot of people change and a lot of process improvement change and a lot of technology change. And so we saw a huge amount of improvement. And you see these themes coming up a lot around healthcare now, the need for change around people and process and technology. And I also, in my time in the NHS, got involved in one of the largest, if not the largest at the time, IT programs, healthcare IT programs. It was called NHS Connecting for Health, also known as the National Programme for IT. And it really taught us a lot about the challenge and the challenge in bringing healthcare into the digital age. So what we know is that if you look at a lot of health IT projects and programs, you find there's a lot of people, clinicians who are trained to be independent, so they kind of have silos of working, and they don't understand their processes very well because they weren't really trained in process analysis or process improvement, and they've either built or bought IT systems that therefore are different to the next team. And so there are a lot of them closed technologies that don't interoperate very well. So we saw a lot of this disconnect, if you like, in silos and clash with process and IT and closed technology during that time. And I spent 5 years there, and I think one of the lessons I learned was that we have a problem in the health IT market, where we have a lot of people from top to bottom all over the world trying to do important innovative change stuff around people and process and technology change, but they're often disconnected from either the e-health bodies that they work in with nationally, or the vendor community may be, helping them or not helping them very well. And then the standards bodies internationally are helping a bit, but maybe not as much as they could. And so you find that either because of a business issue with proprietary locks on the approach, or capacity and people not able to think differently, then you have this kind of what I would call almost dysfunctional health IT market. It's really not good enough, I think, is the best way to summarize it. And what we know is that we have a variety of different forms of that market. We have lots of silos. So on the left, I tend to show a diagram which has lots of silos of information. If you work in a big hospital, or in a region, you'll find a lot of disconnected technology, like I talked about. And then you have this often, promise that one single system X or system Y from one vendor is going to rip and replace all that out, and it's going to make the world better. But it actually often doesn't, and we know the results are very mixed from the monolithic solutions. And we also know that there's a lot of movement in the rest of the world towards more integrated approaches and more what are called services orientated approaches to IT, where you try to understand your core processes and you try to understand your core architecture to meet that. So you need integration capability and so on. So there's a variety of different approaches, and from the silos on the left to the systems monoliths on the right to the best of breed in the middle. And it's a mixed bag, really. Now we know that in England that the national IT program failed after about 10 years. The acute hospitals really didn't go very well. And if you look to the US, so another place where they're putting a lot of money in to the HR market, we know the results there are only fair. So if you go into emergency department in the US, you'll find that actually alongside the emergency physician who's in his white coat here, you often will find a medical scribe. So this is an industry that's been bubbling up in the US to try to handle the poor usability of systems and the poor interoperability, so that they actually have to employ people to actually stand beside the caregivers to actually interact with the technology. And I guess you'd have to ask yourself, what other industry would tolerate such poor technology that they actually have to employ staff, to actually stand beside you to integrate with it or to operate it? It just shows how mediocre and poor the market is, really. So for the last number of years, I've been pushing and talking about the need for an open platform in healthcare, largely from some of the lessons that I learned at the National Programme for IT in the NHS, and from what was happening around, which was, we were seeing, and we have seen many other industries that have been transformed by the need for a platform, or by the advent of a platform. So I've talked about 5 kind of principles that this platform that we're awaiting, and it's going to transform, are going to show. So number 1 is that the usability's got to be great, because it's got to want to look good, it's got to look good and be so good that people want to use it. And that's not an unreasonable ask, I think. But it also means that we got to stop doing waterfall style development and do a much more agile, user-centered approach to development if we want to get that right. Number 2 is that it has to handle integration out of the box. So you're going to have to handle access to existing systems. That's got to be a must. We can't just rip and replace. So we got to be able to do integration. And then that also means that integration with the wires, the wiring alone isn't going to be enough. We're going to have to do something more than that. And I'm going to talk about a key standard if we're trying to get implementation and integration right, and that is the open air standard. So this is this clinical Lego brick approach to building systems. And I talked before about the variety in process and the variety in technology. And if you look clinical systems for the patterns, you'll see patterns of process and patterns of information. And this is what the archetype does. It's a Lego brick, if you like, that clinicians can relate to. Here you see a blood pressure archetype. It's a maximum data set. You can compute it, you can reuse it, And Gartner, who have not been talking about this for some time, have now begun to talk about the open air as being key to the future. And FHIR is part of the answer. You'll have heard about FHIR if you heard about interoperability lately, and that's an important part. But open air, but FHIR on its own isn't enough. We need open air as well. So that's what we're talking about in some of the work we're doing, and I'll show you in a minute. But we also believe that open source is an important part. We believe that there's a need for a community approach to this, and to share, because we think that's a really important fit with healthcare. And of course, that begs questions of governance and leadership. Who's in charge of the governance and who's leading on this? But what I think we are going to see is a new best of breed, either 2.0 or 3.0, where you have a kind of a more Lego brick approach to building systems. And I think that's what we're chasing. That's our future. So just to explain how some of the work we did, took off. So we had took some of the lessons I've mentioned and began to build a kind of a shared integrated care record in the city of Leeds, where I was based. It's known as the Leeds Care Record, and we were following a lot of these principles. And then the Ripple Foundation, Ripple Open Source Initiative came out of that, which is to basically take some lessons around clinical leadership and user-centered design and agile development, and come up with some open source components that could be reused. So that's what the Ripple Foundation's been doing for the last number of years. Now, we did some softer stuff around requirements analysis and information governance and citizen engagement. And then we've been building kind of three key components that we think are needed for many purposes. So number one is UI and UX framework for great usability. Number two is a kind of very capable middleware approach that allows you to join up systems. And number three is a kind of an open standards-based backend. So those are the pieces, and I'll just explain those. And we're really chasing an approach a bit like the Android, where it's a platform that really disrupts the market by seeding some open source tooling. So I mentioned the foundation is led by myself, and it's a non-for-profit foundation. So the UX framework we have is called PulseTile, and I'll show you that in a minute. It's been very much built with user-centered kind of design approaches as we have gone along, and very much patterns-based and component-based. So the idea of tiles, it could be core tiles and then plug-in tiles, reusable components at the UX layer. And that's been built, with in Angular and React, with kind of common requirements in mind around the UX. So that's the first component. Number two is Qt.js, which has already been developed by Rob Tweed, and his work hails from elsewhere in the open source health IT world, and it's really a quite capable enterprise grade and highly scalable Node.js based middleware that we use. It's very light. It can run on a Raspberry Pi, but it's also very capable of working at scale for integration. And we use this for all kinds of integration purposes. But here's an interesting view as to how we handle, mapping between FHIR and open air, for instance, by basically just reducing the challenge to a JSON to JSON transformation challenge. And we can point you to some of the technology, but it's essentially saying let's reduce the integration challenge to a JSON to JSON mapping challenge. And then we got Ethersys, which is our open air compliant repository, which again services the JSON RESTful APIs to make it easy to leverage, and it's compliant to the AQL standard of open air. So it's the first open source open air repository that's AQL compliant, and that's been gifted. So that's based on the archetype standard that I mentioned a few minutes ago. So the way the Ripple Foundation is working is that we're trying to, seed a new approach. We're trying to raise awareness in this part of the world where we're based around the UK and Ireland and Europe, but trying to grow with a kind of a broad geographical approach in mind, and just trying to support the adoption of these tools. We're a very lean, small team, try to be transparent and trying to offer support to people who are trying to use these tools. around, getting people up with giving them advice around leadership and strategy and education and training and quality assurance. So what we're really trying to do is seed the tools out there and then make sure that they grow and they get quality assured as they grow, and then let the community grow around those. So here's an example of a project that's taking the tools and beginning to use them. So this is a Leeds City person held record. So this is aimed at taking the tools and building a person held record with them. So that's one of the projects they're involved in. We've also been involved in kind of agitating for funds at a pretty high level in this part of the world around saying, let's not spend all of the money that you're spending in health IT on the usual suspects. Let's not spend it all on proprietary technology. Let's put 1% of the 4 billion that's been meant to be used in the NHS towards open platform technologies. So that's what our 1% fund is about, where we're chasing 1% of the funds to build open platform based tooling. And if you look at some of the interest we got, we did a call this time last year and we got about 40, 50 different submissions for, proposals, and those were, these kind of tools. We've got some of them already, UI tools, integration, data repository I mentioned, but we also got ideas around, ID and authorization, terminology, workflow, scheduling, business intelligence, and so on and so forth. So these are tools that we think could be useful and reusable across the planet. And we're trying to get help to get those out there. And we know that there's already work ongoing. We're just trying to support that. And what we've done is, I'm also, I should have mentioned, a director of the Aperta Foundation, which is also a non-profit in England aimed at kind of this agenda. So we've published a paper around defining an open platform. So we've been quite specific on what we mean by the open platform. Just it's another iteration of some of the points I was making earlier on around standards based and vendor tech neutral and information models and open APIs and federatable and so on. And what we've suggested is that if you get funds available, that we build these tools to these standards, then they can be reused anywhere in the planet. That's really the idea. We're in touch with Digital Square, and we think their global goods initiative is a great initiative. We've bid into that process. We think that it's a very smart way of getting a reusable global goods around the world. But we are very keen to make sure we don't have two sets of global goods, one for the high income countries and one for the low and middle income countries. We think there should be one set of really good digital goods for the whole planet, and that's what we're trying to get our work into. And just to maybe hit on something that some of you may be familiar with, which I think is a very smart piece of work around the open HIE approach around a kind of a standards-based, implementable, interchangeable architecture. You may know this already and know that they've already identified a very similar set of components that are needed for their purpose. And we're simply saying we recognize this. We'd like to reuse this. We'd like to improve some of these components. We'd like to add some of these components. And, for instance, in the shared health record space, we think there's a role for open air in there. We think the work we've done on Qt could help with the interoperability challenge. We think our pulse tile front end could really help. And so we're just trying to align with that effort there. And so I'm beginning to close now by saying that, what we're trying to do is really seed some projects and products that can be reused to grow with a community-based approach to build out this open platform, because we don't have any doubt in our minds that this is the future of 21st century care. We're hoping that our work is useful into that mix, and we're waiting for others, and we're working with others who I think share that mission and that vision. And there's a challenge ahead, but there's no doubt in my mind that this is going to be the transformative way that healthcare will be transformed in this century. So I'm going to finish there with some of our contact details, our website, and our Twitter and email address, but begin to take questions now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Tony. So to all our participants, we are now open for questions. You can enter your questions in the questions box. We'll be waiting. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. And while those questions are coming in, I'll just move over to our website for a moment, just to show you around that. Here we have links to our pulse tile, our Qt, and our Aethersys tooling. We have a link to our demonstration environment, which is a tool that allows you to experiment with the stack in action. And then in each of the tools, you will find some very good documentation for each of the tools that are there. They're all explained in pretty good detail as to the motives behind each of them, and the components. And then for each of them, there's quite thorough documentation about how you would understand and get your way around the tools. And everything's on GitHub for those of you who wanted to have a look at the tools on GitHub and raise issues and so on and so forth. Okay, just back here. Anybody got any questions at all?
So far, there are no questions, Dr. Tony.
Okay.
Here, there's one question from Dr. Dave. It reads, can you tell us more about how you would like to work with OpenHIE?
Oh, okay, sure. So let me just jump over to OpenHIE for a second. So I mean, I think OpenHIE and the smart, there's some really smart thinking going on there, which really was news to me until about a year ago or so, because I just hadn't come across it. It just goes to show how easy it is to, to be working in isolation. We have to try to join this stuff up. So OpenHIE, as I understand it, is a very smart target architecture for how, if you're going to build a system, you should build a system. And I recognize these components here around terminology and a registry and a shared index and so on. And I really like the fact that there are reference technologies here. That's the really smart way to do it, which is to commit not just to the architecture, but to open source implementations. If I'm honest, where I think that there are a couple of gaps is that the usability of of health IT is notoriously poor. And I don't see anything here around, a great UI framework, UX framework. So we'd like to suggest that PulseTile could be added into this mix as a great UI, UX framework in here. And I also think that there's missing a trick around open air. So there's no reference to the open air standard in this OpenHIE architecture. And I think that, again, is missing a trick now. Open air is not trivial. But our Aethersys technology could certainly be added into the mix to make this OpenHIE architecture stronger, I think. So we've got a proposal into the global goods there, and the common thread there is around, which is around Qt, which would be used to join those things up. There's a lot of overlap between Qt and OpenHIM. So the Open Health Information Mediator tool, again, a very smart piece of technology, and essentially it would be you'd be very interested to see the overlap between Qt and OpenHIM. There's a lot of overlap. They're both similar based technologies, and the Mediator library that they've got there fits very much with the approach that we have around reusable integration components in Qt. So I think there's a lot of potential ways that we could I think help align with the OpenHIE architectural thinking, learn from it. There's a lot of good stuff here, as well as help to improve it, we hope. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yes. Are there any more questions from our participants? You can enter your questions in the questions box.
So I think can it accommodate microservices architecture? Yes, it's interesting that you say that, because Qt has been built again with that very much in mind. It has been, just put that over there. Qt has been built with a microservices-based architecture for some time now, and that is being used in our latest iteration of the tool. Let me just jump over to our our repository here, and I'll show you that. So here's our microservices instance of Qt, which is effectively the middleware that has been split into a number of different microservices around MPI, around access to PHR, access to authentication services, access to the OpenAir CDR. So that thinking is already in there. But yeah. And happy to take a particular question on that, but yes, that thinking is already in there, it's safe to say. And actually, that's why we're talking to the OpenHIM people, the Gemby people, about the overlap in how their work, which I believe is microservices based as well, would be where there's some overlap. So we've been just on that point, we've been basically putting submissions into the Global Goods Initiative to try to get some, seeding of some opportunity to get our technology joined up, if you like, with the OpenHIE and other components as part of this Global Goods Initiative. So we're keen to just do some work on showcasing how they could be together, but we'd need some help from the other teams to try to make those joins, I think. And I take it that if there's no more questions that oh, okay, sorry, another question there. What's the plan for Fire? Right, okay. Okay, so Fire is a key part of the mix, in the sense that let me just jump across to here. So what we know is that Fire is being used for interchange. And we think that the role of Fire is strong in interchange, and there's a large initiative in this part of the world called Interopen, which is all about the role of Fire as an interchange standards. So we have built, or sorry, one of the reasons we adopted Qt was that it's very, very JSON orientated and very JSON friendly. So what we've done is we've basically taken Fire, and we've done some work on how you can actually transform Fire to and from other elements of our stack. So let's imagine Fire is coming in or going out. You also need, in a JSON format, I should say, we also need a different JSON format for the presentation layer, and we're using a JSON object for persistence in OpenAir. So what we're doing here is we're saying we can handle Fire APIs and expose Fire APIs, and we can do the mapping between Fire and anything else that we need to from either a UI point of view or an OpenAir point of view. So we're very Fire capable already. And of course, then the question is which Fire profile and so on would we be working against? And the ones that we're working against at this point in time are based on the Interopen standard, which is this is it here, I think. Interopen, yeah, it's basically a set of profiles in the this part of the world, which are defined as Fire standards. So that's what we're working against, but the principles are the same. So what we're saying is that the tooling is there and capable of handling Fire. The question is which Fire profiles do you want to interact with? Because what we're trying to say is that let's not discuss those in isolation, but let's get them in a demonstration environment where we can show Fire in action. So what we're able to show is Fire being fed into our stack as an interchange standard. And there's a related question there about watching this. I'm not sure if this video is being recorded. Yes, I think it is. But just in terms of some of the other stuff that I'm showing you, there's a set of videos here that I'm going to just be able to point you at, which is our stack of YouTube videos, which kind of takes you from our front end, which is pulse tile, to queued, which is where the fire stuff comes in, to open air at the back end. And you can look at all those videos there to kind of try to understand the component parts. And hopefully that answers Miko's questions around fire and the architecture and watching stuff later. Thank you for those good questions.
There's another question.
I see that. Yeah. Okay. Okay, really good question about how do you plan to increase traction in community growth? Okay, that's a great question. So I think the key thing is to get tools out there that are easy to use. In the first instance, key to get tools that are somewhere we can showcase, um, and key and to basically get them into the right environments so that basically they are become the why wouldn't you use these tools. So one of the areas that we're aiming at is this thing called a hack day. I'll just see if I can bring you that. So basically there are a load of hack days in the NHS, but there are also, I guess, becoming more widely understood around the rest of the planet. This is about making IT less bad. So it shows that what usually happens is you have geeks, you have doctors, and you have techies who come along and want to tackle a problem. But what we know is that if you get most people who are new to tackling a problem in health IT, they don't know where to start. They come along to any of this. They come along to OpenHIE or they come along to OpenAir or anything else, and they just don't know where to start. It's just it's intense. This stuff is intimidating. So what we want to do is we want to be able to get on a Docker container or another quick and easy install script, something that people can get started with in an hour. And with that, what they get is they get an application that they can begin to hack against. And what they get is an environment where they can begin to create a new module. So what we have here is an application that's out of the box that should be easy to get up and running, with little or no effort to start with a series of modules. So here we've got problems and diagnosis. Forgive the messy test data. We got medications, we got allergies, we've got a whole load of existing components already, and some of them look nicer than others. I'll just show you this one, which is a particularly nice, pretty one. And some of them are, graphical and some are not. But, tell us where their gap is, and then they can identify where they want to add in a new plugin. So get them started with a right starter kit, which is an application and components and a component that they can then reuse and then refactor. So they can then say, right, I'd like to do brain surgery or knee surgery, and I'm going to spend my weekend doing that. And that then allows them to get started with this open platform stack in a day or two, and then begin to hack it. And to do that, they're going to need a new UI widget. They're going to need some JSON in the middle, and they're going to need an open air template. And we got to just make that as easy as we can for people. And if we can do that, then we begin to make it a more normal environment for people to actually begin to learn health IT with. So if you get it into that environment and we get it seeded into the areas that I mentioned, for instance, around the Leeds person health record, where we have a couple of showcases. And then we have, if we can make any traction with the global goods and getting some funding to try to get, it into that kind of environment, we're beginning to get it seeded so that it becomes a kind of a go-to set of tools, very much like OpenHIM, or sorry, OpenHIE are, but in a very easy to get started way. We don't think it's easy enough to get started yet, and we have to do something about that. So that's our challenge for this year. Let me just go back to another question here that, okay, hold on. So hopefully that answers the question about, gaining traction and community growth, which is to try to grow that from the bottom up, mostly. And of course, everything's on GitHub and so on. So how many participants? At the moment, Alvin, the number involved in our core team is small. So there's just a small number of us that are building this approach, and we have a lead for each of the products that I showed you. But our aim is to keep this small, and we're trying to make sure others pick these tools up and then get using them. And there's a group using each of the tools in different places for different things at the moment. But the numbers are still relatively small at the moment. We're not hit with hundreds and thousands of developers because this is still a niche area at the moment. But obviously we hope over time that changes. Because all we can do in the meantime is build the tools as best we can, make sure they're the best in their class. Let me see here. Okay, oh yeah, does it offer commercial support in case countries are interested? Are there countries who are already subscribed? So the idea of the Ripple Foundation is not to get into commercial support arrangements with the tools on our own, but to try to find existing in-house teams or so businesses or organizations in countries that want to support these tools. So yes, we're in conversation with a number of different suppliers from England and Ireland and elsewhere in Europe who are basically interested in supporting this market. And our role really would be as code custodians of these tools. So we're trying to act as kind of the guardians, if you like, of these tools, but we want the market to grow in a big way. And we would maybe be able to offer third line support for these tools for sure with our small team, but we're not going to get into big, large deployments because we want the market to take these and grow with them. So when we go into an area, we're doing projects in Europe at the moment, what we're doing is we're working with the area that needs these tools and we're getting them started. But then the aim is to hand over to a supplier to then take them and support them, and that's the model. So the countries that are most interested, I would say, are the UK and Ireland. Germany are doing some important work on Ethresis. Some people in Sweden are beginning to look at it. But it's not a subscription model. They have a project and they want to use it, or they don't. That's the model. Where would be a good place to start for the use of the stack? Is there a community we can tap? So the stack is very capable of doing a lot of things. We're using it for a PHR, person held record, that I mentioned. We're also able to use it for an EPR or what we call an integrated digital care record solution. So it's aimed at supporting multiple multiple needs, and if there's any generic requirement you have at all, that's where you would start. Something, pretty much whatever the clinical scenario is, we think there's a way to kind of get started with this stack now because we've done quite a lot of the groundwork. And the community you can tap, yes, there is a community. As I mentioned, we have quite a bit of discussion already happening on GitHub. We're on Gitter if you want to ask questions there. And I guess that would be the online virtual community you're after. Okay, I think that one answers that one from Alvin, I hope. Anything else that you have question-wise? I don't see any new questions there, but just to go back to the basics, where our website is, the Ripple Foundation, where each of the three tools are here. They each have a website with GitHub with documentation. I'll just quickly show you the Pulse-style one, which is very nicely documented as well. I'll just show you that. Just to give you an idea of how we do it. So the website explains the tool. Here's got a nice video which explains the rationale behind the tool. Won't have time to go into that today, but within that you also can see the documentation, and you've got an Angular and React version. So you can have a look at our core tiles, which are all nicely documented, or our plugin tiles. And here you can see there's a lot of of work being done on a lot of components, if you like, So those are all there for people to get started with. Same goes for Qt. Same goes for Ethersys, which has been documented. So there's a lot of material there to get started with, and then on top of that, we've also got our documentation that brings the component pieces together. Talks about how you get the stack installed. You can get installed on your own environment in about 10 or 15 minutes if you're comfortable with the Linux machine. And then it talks about the component parts and how they are all connected together. But we kind of expect you to have questions, so we'd expect you to come on GitHub and ask us some questions. Okay, thanks, Alvin. That's good. I'll send along some enthusiasts. Okay, that's fine, Alvin. Please do send people our way. Okay, how do you handle the dynamic nature of healthcare data? What if new fields are added? Okay, do you need to readjust the schema? Okay, so you're getting into questions there about what can you standardize within the record and what can't you standardize within the record. And it's safe to say that the OpenAIRE methodology here is basically a methodology that allows us to kind of standardize the bits that we think should be standardized around problems, medications, and allergies. There should not be too much debate for the most part around the data model of an allergy, although there will be some. So again, forgive the slightly messy test data here, but the point is that you have a reasonably solid data model around core concepts, and then we do obviously allow other freedom for what would be called the more narrative data. So there are tools that we've built which allow for more the narrative side of data. I'll see if I can do an ED note here. So this is a tool that allows us to put in it's a kind of fairly free form tool. I'll just get that out of the way. That allows us to put in quick and fire statements, and that's built based on a tool that we have designed that is very flexible for quick fire data entry that basically allows you to put a quick tagged clinical statements together for data where you're not quite sure that you want to archetype it. So that's there for more narrative, quick data entry as well. But what we know is that that's part of it. There's a blend between structured data in OpenAIRE and data that isn't structured. The schema for OpenAIRE shouldn't change very often. There's other data that should be more flexible, and we're able to handle both the structured data that schema doesn't change very often, as well as the flexible data that needs to change fairly quickly on the fly. Okay. So good questions from Miko and Elvin. I think I've covered those. Okay, from Raymond. Okay, regarding data structure, are additional fields added as additional columns or via entity attribute values, EAV models? Okay, so I think you probably need to, we need to point you towards OpenAIRE and the archetype stuff. I'm just trying to think the best way to understand how the tooling works is to look at our video list and to look at this video at the bottom, which is a showcase of the tooling in action. And what this does is it shows how archetypes are built. And here you also have a template designer. And so what we're doing here is we're saying that for data structures, you need to use the OpenAIRE, or we're using the OpenAIRE approach, which is a set of tools and a set of specifications that allow you to actually capture your data model, to improve your data model, to refine your data model, and then also to constrain your data model. So here you can see they're using the maximum data set here for blood pressure and respirations, and then the author is going to constrain those out. Now, this is a design time tool, and then how that gets implemented in the actual implementation is agnostic of the design time tool. The important thing to understand about OpenAir is that it's a standard that is independent of the technology that is implemented. So what you have is the underlying technology looks after that additional field for you, without the clinical author needing to worry about whether it's a column or a row or an EAV kind of extension. If you want to know how the data is persisted in eThersys, we can put you in contact with Christian Chevalier, who's authored eThersys, as to how he's doing that at a low level. But the clinical author who's doing OpenAir doesn't need to know that data. Okay. Question: Can we loop? To Raymond. Into our local HL7 efforts. Okay. That's, I guess. Please give Raymond the mic. Is that right?
Hello, Dr. Raymond. I think he can unmute his microphone now if he has a microphone. Hello, Dr. Raymond.
Just waiting for that to happen. I guess I should just sit tight here. Is there anything you need me to do, Cha?
I think Dr. Raymond needs to unmute his microphone. Hello, Dr. Raymond.
Okay, so you need
Please
to
click the
unmute there.
microphone icon. Hello, Dr. Raymond. Please unmute your microphone. Just click the icon.
I guess he's having audio issues there. If you want to just mention anything there in the chat or in the questions.
Yes, in the questions box. There's a message from Dr. Alvin, Dr. Tony.
Yes, I see that. Maybe you can add the Ripple stack as an edge system and then explore extending it as a platform. Okay, if I understand your point there, Alvin, that that makes sense. So what you probably mean by an edge system is that, maybe you've got a requirement for some system, but it's not the core system that you want to run your facility on immediately. What we would call a specialist system, and you can certainly do that for any specialty system you like. So it could be a knee surgery system or a brain surgery system, or I'm just making it up now, but the point is you could use it for any use case. We've built it to be generic and reusable for anything really. And then yes, you could then extend it. The approach you're talking there is what we call bimodal. So you're running this alongside your core systems and you're beginning to experiment with this as you go. But yes, you could certainly do that. Okay. So Tony, the Scylla collects standards compliance system and interconnects them. Okay, I'm guessing that's one of your core systems. Ask Ripple for access to experts as we install one of our point of care systems to make sure we do it the right way. Yeah, if you need help with that, by all means, what we're able to do is we're able to we're able to point you to our free software and our free documentation. We're able to answer some questions, of course. That's the whole idea, and we'd encourage you to get on GitHub or Gitter. If you're going to need a lot of help to get started, then we would be happy to help you. But we may have to ask you to see whether we want to fund a project to that, because we're a not-profit organization. We have to try to get some funds for projects. But yeah, of course, if you want to get started, feel free to come at us with questions. Okay. And just where the questions would be, I'll just show you. So Gitter. So we have a Gitter channel here. That's our Gitter channel, which I can point you to for questions. We have different channels for the different tools. But obviously for eThersys, for instance, we have Athersys has got its own repository with questions and so on there. So that's another place you could go if it's an Athersys related question. I know you have an interest in Athersys, Alvin, and more general questions around Ripple and our stack. Come here and ask questions here, or contact us with the contact details that I mentioned. Actually, that's the other way you could get in contact here. Okay. Thanks again, Alvin. And I know you were trying to bring Raymond in, but he's not connected, so I didn't see any more questions from Raymond. But
I think that's the last question, Dr. Tony.
That's fine.
Yes, all right. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar. Also to Dr. Tony for sharing your expertise.
Well, no, thank you for the opportunity. And again, hopefully the contact details here means we do invite you to come and get in contact, ask us more questions, try out our tools. Hopefully they'll help you, and you can also help us make them better and get them more broadly available to the rest of the world. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank
Thank
you,
you, Dr.
everybody, for your
Tony.
comments. Thank you now. Bye-bye.
Bye.